All right. Welcome to the podcast, Michael. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me. It's an honor. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot of fun today, just from the little bit that we were talking about before we started recording. But could you introduce yourself to everybody who's listening?
Yeah, I mean, I got the short version, the podcast version. I got a bunch of versions. But my name's Mike Collins, and I'm the founder of SugarAddiction.com. And the story of how I got here is, it takes a minute or two, but I thought I grew up as a regular kid. I mean, I was, you know, covered up in sugar, basically, as all of America is. It's a kind of a sad story at the beginning. My mom, my grandma, her mother died when she was 8 years old, and she really they owned the country store across the way, and they would anytime she came in, they would my grandfather made this deal, just give it to her, just give it, So she really thought sugar was love, and she really, I think, till she died, she believed that. And so we had it like really early, and I didn't know, I ever thought anything. We had unfettered access to the sugar bowl. We could put as much sugar on our cornflakes or whatever as we wanted. And, we would be scraping out a half of an inch on the bottom. It was crazy. And so fast forward, I ran into beer. I didn't know that was changing my state, right? This is the kind of we talked about before we came on. It's a kind of an integral part of the story. There's a great video on YouTube, Eric Clapton with Ed Bradley from 60 Minutes. And Ed says to Eric, they're sitting in a $7 million Antigua treatment center. And Ed says to Eric, he says, so Eric, this addiction thing, it started with heroin, right? And Eric Clapton says, no, Ed, it started with sugar. I started at 5 years old eating bread and butter and sugar sandwiches to change my state, right? And so remember that kind of idea as we move through this. But fast forward to me till about 14 or 15, I run into beer. And I know beer changes my state. I was kind of shy. And we would drink behind the high school, and I was able to talk to girls at the dance kind of thing. And so that was like the first awareness of that. And then another quick fast forward to about 28, and I got sober. That's a completely another podcast. But after my sobriety, I literally fell right back into the sugar. I did that, substitute one drug for another. And I fall into the sugar. And I was a thin, athletic guy, and I gained a lot of weight. And my face was all broken out and that kind of thing. And I'm trying to, understand this. So I read a book called Sugar Blues. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's an older book. And the author ended up marrying Gloria Swanson, the famous movie star. And they promoted this book pretty heavily in the late 70s and early 80s. And I loved the history lesson. I just loved the idea of how sugar worked its way into our diet. And so the sugar working its way into our diet really revolves around the slave trade, and the British Empire growing big enough to take over the entire world on the backs of sugar and slavery. And so I don't know how the universe or God or whatever put it in my head to this was a thing of mine. I don't know. So I started the process of quitting sugar and flour and caffeine. It took a couple of years alone because I really didn't have anybody to talk to about it. And I talked the woman that I was married to at the time into having children, 2 children. They were twins, and they didn't have sugar in the womb. They didn't have sugar, flour, or caffeine in the womb until they were 6 years old. And we regained our composure that next day. And through their entire childhood, they never really had sugar in the house at all, and they had it a little at outside birthday parties. But anyway, the kids always said I should write a book about sugar, and I did eventually do that in 2018. But in 2010, I bought the name SugarAddiction.com, and I started giving information out because it was kind of my thing. And nothing really happened. I mean, some people took it and ran with it, and I was finding the best research and blogging about it and whatever. But it wasn't until I was kind of semi-retired about 3 or 4 years ago that I started coaching people and having these online groups and forums that the thing really just took off. And we come to find out that people really do need a lot of support to do this because it's such a societally accepted addiction and problem. So that's the short version. And that's the podcast version. It usually brings up more questions than it answers, but that's how we got here, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I first became aware of you on your I don't know if it's like your annual kind of symposium where you bring together a lot of different
Oh,
experts about sugar addiction.
the Quit
Is that
Sugar Summit. Yeah,
yeah, the Quit
absolutely.
Sugar
It's our
Summit.
sixth
Yeah.
year. Our seventh event is in September. Yeah, a great
Yeah.
event. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Like it's kind of everybody who speaks on this all in one place, which was
Yeah, it really is. It's the who's who of, and the interesting part is a lot of them never really got any exposure. They kind of been researching in anonymity, and we kind of shined a lot of light on it, and it's
yeah.
gained a lot of momentum now. It's pretty big now.
So that brings up the big question of why is it that you think like sugar and processed food addiction doesn't get the exposure? It's still fairly controversial, as I'm sure you know, that not everybody believes in
Exactly.
it.
Oh yeah, I mean it's very controversial, and it's not really in the DSM. It's not in the manual that describes these things, which is just crazy because caffeine. It's crazy, but anyway, and I think there has been, should we put it kindly? I don't want any problems because I don't really have a problem with the big sugar producers, but they have, how's the word, obfuscated work. They've obfuscated the information around sugar for decades now, and they have a big machinery that is vested in getting these products to people. And Michael Moss's new book, Hooked, you could probably get him on this show, is just amazing in chronicling what they've done over the decades to get sugar, get to understand the addictive nature of sugar and to weaponize it against their customers, in essence, to get them hooked earlier and earlier with the sugar sweetened beverages and stuff and the cereals. And so it's been why it isn't known, I think, is multifaceted. The second part, I think, is that people don't like the word addiction. Even
Mhm.
Google and Facebook don't like the words addiction. I mean, it's a, it's still stigmatized. And a lot of our recovery work comes from the world of food addiction. I got started in late stage food addiction, right? And that means people 200 and 300 pounds overweight, losing limbs, going blind, and they still can't quit sugar. Doctor says you're going to die this year if you don't, quit this sugar. Diabetes, diagnosis and whatever, and they still can't quit, right? To me, and working with these folks, this is the definition of addiction. And when you talk to the folks, I always use this proverbial. I think we talked about it before we got started. I always use this proverbial um, person who lost 100 to 200 pounds and kept that weight off and fell to a right sized body, put diabetes 2 in remission or something, really recovered from their sugar addiction through abstinence. That person does not talk about the food or the exercise or the diet that they were on. They talk about the emotional management recovery that they went through, the growth that they had in that part of their life. So that's kind of the why I believe that it just doesn't get, a fair shift. I was last year the chairman of the Food Addiction Institute, which has been around 2005, nonprofit 501c. And their stated goal is to get this named into the World Health Organization and the DSM the next time around. And it might not
Mhm.
be this time by the looks of, the food pyramid that just came out. There's just not a lot of support yet. But I just tell people they spend 5 minutes in my inbox, 5 minutes on my instant messenger, they will know the pain that's out there. And look,
Mhm.
the obesity numbers mirror what I'm saying here. It's not, since the 80s, it's gone straight up, just straight up, to the right on a curve.
Mhm.
So
And
yeah,
you're referring to in the 80s, kind of the low fat craze that then resulted in
right,
fat being replaced
demonized.
by sugar in most food. Yeah.
Yeah, no, fat was demonized and sugar was elevated. I don't know, that's a terrible way to put it, but it was, they took the fat out and they replaced it with sugar, and high fructose corn syrup really in a big way
Hmm.
hit the marketplace and into the food system. And they run parallel. The growth of uh, the high fructose corn syrup in the food system and the obesity numbers, they run, parallel straight up and to the right, or, on a 45-degree angle, straight up and to the right on a graph. So.
Yeah. Let's talk. I have a lot of different questions, but let's talk about the label of addiction. Because it came up recently with somebody I was working with. It's some people find it really helpful to have that label, like to hear about
Mhm.
sugar addiction and to be like, oh, that's what it is. Like, it's not me, it's this external substance. Whereas,
Yeah.
like you said, it's still a stigmatized term. So some people struggle with, even if they identify with it, they struggle with that label and that term. It makes them feel ashamed or something else, something negative about the fact that they're experiencing this. Do you want to
Mhm.
talk about your experience with how people relate to using those labels personally?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is the bane of my existence. I've got to trick people into the programs because they don't want to hear it up front, right? They want to think that they're doing what's all the rage now, which is a sugar detox. They want to, give it a break. They'll pause, push the pause button for a little bit. They want to like do a detox, right? So I bring people in under the guise that they're doing a detox. And then I kind of spring it on them that they may want to look at the possibility that they could be addicted to sugar. And then, so I ease them into it. And the addiction component is like, how do I put this in a kind way? It's just what it is. I mean, you could change the names around, and they have changed the names of drug addicts and addiction there to substance use disorder. And I actually believe that may happen before sugar addiction gets into the DSM. I believe it will be named processed food addiction or sugar use disorder, or excuse me, not processed food use disorder or sugar use
Mhm.
disorder. And I think it's logical. I think it's the right thing to do. It's the kind of the right side of history, if you will. Um, but people just they can't get over it. They can't get over it in the drug and alcohol world. So it's really hard in this world. And this cleaving apart of the substances, where whole food is on one side and sugar and flour and caffeine are on another side, where these are uh, they're substances that are psychoactive that will affect the nucleus accumbens and whatever. Whereas on the other side, we share the delivery system, right? And the idea that you're addicted to food sounds ridiculous, right? You're not addicted to food. It's true. You're addicted to these psychoactive substances that have been reduced to a drug like form, a white powder. So again, it's a complicated kind of stigmatized thing that no one can really put their finger on how to change yet, and it's just an evolutionary thing that's got to happen slowly, I guess.
Mhm. Now, the other thing I find interesting with sugar is you could probably find a lot of people that are okay with the idea of cutting alcohol out and, like, could see how it would make sense that somebody would cut alcohol out of their life and not drink it or choose to not drink it at all. When it comes to sugar, people seem to struggle with that. Like, there's something about sugar and processed food that seems to be thought of like if you're cutting it out, you're engaging in some form of restriction that seems outside of the realm of normal or expected. Why do you think it's approached differently than the other substances in our life?
I think it's cultural, to be honest with you. And the sad part about this, and I'm gonna, especially on this podcast, I might get a little bit of I can deal with it because I'm there now on the other side of the fence. But even the food or the eating disorder specialists, right? They believe that if you demonize a food, quote unquote, and then you're not recovering, you're not changing, right? And this includes anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating. And it's just not true. I mean, in my world, it's just not true. There are people that biochemically cannot ingest sugar, and the stigma around demonizing. And here's a real important distinction, in that bulimia and anorexia, and possibly even some parts of binge eating, are process addictions like gambling and sex. And sugar and flour are true substance use disorders. Does that make sense? And so this delineation is not even well known with dietitians or, like I said, eating disorder folks, and they don't dive further into it. But the people that I respect, the people that have been on the summit, who've talked about it this way, in this way, have made that delineation. And my background being in addiction, medicine, addiction recovery, and helping people, it's very clear to me now that this is what the delineation is and should be and should remain and should grow. But that's culturally not the case. It's and even in the professional world, it's not yet accepted. It's slowly being accepted as people tell their story, the same way that the people in the drug and alcohol world, the large K Street, Washington, D.C. nonprofits, have chosen to destigmatize, which is have everyone tell their story who has recovered. They tell the story that I'm telling, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the folks that have, you know, that are writing the textbooks and out there again. Anyway, it's a tough subject right now in the world. So, but it's an important one, I think.
And I wonder if it's partly because, maybe the people that are writing the policies and are promoting everything in moderation are the
Right.
people that the substances don't influence their brain in quite the same way. Like they don't have the lived experience of feeling compelled to eat the food, even though there's harm happening in their body because of the food, where they can just have a little bit and walk away and haven't experienced the inability to have a little bit and walk away.
Great insight.
Um,
They're normies.
yeah.
The work out of the Food Addiction Institute is quite clear that 1/3 of people, and these track with the uh, obesity numbers too, but you can be a thin sugar addict. I want to clarify that. But about 1/3 of people um, uh, biochemically cannot handle this product without a massive setup for cravings. And it could be culturally, it could have happened in the womb. It doesn't matter how it happened. It happened. It's like being an alcoholic. You've got to accept it, because fighting against it is a useless, ridiculous long-term battle you'll never win if you biochemically can't ingest it. And about 1/3 of people are what we call harmful users. And harmful users, I call them push alcoholics or push sugar addicts, meaning they've ingested it for so long that now they have either a physiological dependency on it, or a brain reward. And this is, we'll get into this in a minute, but the brain reward chemical information in the last 5 years has just exploded. And so those harmful users, they're adapted to it now, and they like it, and they use it as a emotional management tool. And the weight comes on sometimes. So you have 1/3 of people obese, 1/3 of people overweight, and then about 1/3 of people are like normal. They're normies. They can, like you say, that, and a lot of athletes and diet people, they are normies. They've never had what you call the lived experience of this, and so they can't relate, right? They can't they can't relate to this thing. And so uh, they can have a half a glass of wine, they can have a half a cupcake and leave it sitting there, which people like me are amazed at. I'm like, oh my, how can you have half a cupcake? That's ridiculous. Why would you do that? And so, until like the it's a great term you use, lived experience of the people who have gone through it and recovered, gets to be public knowledge, which is my basic goal in life with the summit and all the stuff that we do. The stigma of it and the education of it is not going to change. the science is there. As I said, the last 5 years has brought so much movement forward in the understanding of the nucleus accumbens in the reward system in the brain, the dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, the adrenal glands, the oxytocin, the big one, and even your endorphins, normally runners high. All these things are affected by sugar and flour and caffeine. These things are played with. We're like literally like trying to create a cocktail to assuage current stressors, old trauma. I mean, 80-90% of people who recover have some old trauma that they're covering up, right? Forget about handling today's stress. And when people begin to understand that they are able to not use drugs and alcohol, but use sugar and flour, and again, when you talk to these people who have recovered, that's exactly how they did it. That's exactly how they got recovery, is because they understood it. The light bulb went on. Okay, I tell this story of a woman in our program. She's now one of my coaches. Um, and she was a Weight Watchers leader twice in her life in 2 different decades. And she yo-yoed the whole time, up and down, doing the food, whatever. She went first when she was 16 on her mother's plan. She was illegal. And I was doing a testimonial with her, and I said, Bethany, why did this click this time? Why did this work? Why were you able to change and keep it long term where, through the decades, she's approaching 50 years old, approach it, why didn't, your attempts before, she's got a list of like 18 different plans she's tried, diet plans, including the Weight Watchers leaders groups. And she said, Mike, I was above addiction. That was her answer. She's like, it wasn't me. I was not addicted. That was not something I was willing or able to accept. I knew about it, she said, but she just wasn't willing or able to accept it. And so again, we're right back to the stigmatization. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, that stigma comes with thoughts of, okay, if I identify with this, what then does it mean for my life? Which
Right.
it means probably you shouldn't eat the substance. And then what does that mean for every cultural like celebration that we have, particularly in North
Or,
America? I think it comes with a lot when people are considering whether or not they like having this label, or they want to own it or approach it that way.
right.
Now, you referenced towards the beginning of this interview talking about the coping strategies and the need to relearn new coping strategies, which
Mm-hmm.
I think is really important. Do you want to talk a little bit more in detail about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The core of it is the original understanding that you have used um, sugar and flour to manage your emotional state or your emotional life. It's a very known and well understood and well accepted construct in the drug and alcohol world that if you started using drugs and alcohol at 14 or 15 years old, you stop growing emotionally. Very well known if you go to treatment, and even in the 12-step stuff, that's very well understood. Your life's a mess, your relationships are a mess, your career is a mess because you didn't deal with problems. You didn't learn a tool set to deal with problems. You dealt with them with a substance that day, and they were still there the next day, and then you did it again at 4 o'clock. So it's the same kind of thing with sugar and flour when you get the recovery. And you need, in the early days of a detox and a shift, a pivot, a change in lifestyle, change in diet, you need to adopt these things early on. You can't wait. You've heard the research. The research is lore, it's scientific lore. When people lose a large amount of weight, 90+% of them gain it all back in the first year. The CDC did a study on the Biggest Loser and had the same exact results. And how did they lose weight? 98% of all diets, any diet, the original core of all diets is quit the white stuff, period. That every single diet you can ever, they got a bunch of other celery this and diet that and exercise this. But at the end of the day, every one of them at its core says quit the white stuff. And that's what people do. They restrict the white stuff, but they never change their emotional management system that they adopted probably in the womb definitely by 1 years old, they were being fed sugar. Just think back. I mean, when was the last time you saw a movie where a woman got dumped by a man and didn't have an ice cream party, right? I mean, we're talking about a
Mhm.
situation where your mother was busy, she had a job, she had other kids. When you were crying, instead of getting down on your level, giving you a hug, say, "What's wrong, dear?" What she did was hand you a cookie and point you to the television, or hand you two cookies and or three cookies, and we learned how to manage our emotions with this substance, right? And fast forward out the other side of the recovering person, when they graph that all out, when they put it on a spreadsheet on their life up and down with sugar and flour, you can spot the stress points. You can spot the times in their life where life with divorce or finances, and they gain 30 pounds in the divorce and blah blah. And you can see it very, very clearly. And my goal is to smash the norm, let them see this clearly, get with thousands of other people that we've walked through this who tell the same story about their emotional rejiggering, their emotional remanagement tool or change, and just keep spreading that message and just keep moving them through the system so that they can understand why. Because people are flummoxed; they just don't understand why they can't beat this thing. And a lot of it comes
Mhm.
down to, yes, information, sure, but it comes down to sheer acceptance of something that is changing pretty rapidly in society, but not yet all the way there as a health issue, right? As a health care issue, as like mental health and the stigmatization there. It's the same type of thing. So yeah, it's
I think too the other thing that gets in the way a little bit is if you're used to managing your emotions with sugar and flour, or other substances, when you try something else, like going for a walk or sitting and reading a book, initially it does not feel the same. It doesn't feel
no, no,
like it's going to do anything. And so there's that element of having to like trust that over time it will actually help and continuing to practice that. Whereas I think a lot of times you can try some of that, it doesn't quite feel the same, and then you end up back with the sugar or the eating to try to cope with whatever's going on and feel like the other stuff never works. But really it needs some practice and some time for your dopamine receptors to recalibrate and adjust.
not truer words have ever been spoken, man. This takes time. This is sometimes a long time depending on your habit. People want change and results, mostly the weight loss. We got the phrase, people come for the vanity, they stay for the sanity. It's like your brain is not, and I've been harder on this and I haven't really wanted to, like, but I've been saying it flat out to people. Your brain is in no shape to make these decisions at this point. And it
Hmm.
takes time to rehab your brain. I mean, I'm sure Dr. Daniel Amen, who's been on PBS and does the brain, done tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of brain scans. And people don't realize that their brain is this affected. And so they want instant results. They want to change they want to lose 50 pounds in a month, right? Or that's the outward appearance thing, but they really want the recovery, the lifestyle change immediately. It just doesn't work that way. It takes time and effort, like you say, to recalibrate your brain chemicals, to heal your body from the inflammation, and to reorder your emotional life. Athletes have a little bit better time. That's why I think the producers of The Big Losers have a lot of ex-athletes, because they have muscle memory and they can substitute harder, quicker dopamine hits, and that's basically what the show was about. Was how fast can we get like huge amounts of dopamine into folks. um, and but the average person who wasn't an athlete like that takes time, and it takes time to reorder everything. So yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, it just takes some time.
So how do you encourage people to take that time and to rebuild those or build those coping strategies
The
when it
mag-
feels hard and it feels like it's not working?
the secret sauce, the magic formula is the community. It's always been the community for addiction. The opposite of addiction is connection. And it's you're looking at a group of people who, man, they're smiling and laughing and having a good time, and they say they used to weigh 100 pounds more. I can't believe it. It's not possible. But they show you pictures, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, it worked for them, and let me try it and let me get into this community a little bit. And then when you're down, that's another one of your coping strategies that we talked about. Yeah, you can take a walk and go to yoga, but you can also just log into the group or call a friend, or call your coach or whatever, somebody that has been there, done this, and it seems to have your best interest at heart for both accountability and what we call a loving mirror, so that someone can reflect back to you stuff they've already been through. And when you have uh, a disproportionate amount of people who have already been through this, and you're the lone person who's whining about this, that, and the other candy that you can't have, you don't fit into the group. And those folks, people were herd animals. We want to stay in a cohort, a group of people who we like, or they're doing the same things. And so you adapt, and you adapt to that group that is a positive group. And again, it's the magic that that's why the 12 steps is the largest personal development group in the world. Because not forget about the spirituality, forget about the stupid sayings, forget about it all. What it comes down to, and there's a lot of peer reviewed studies on this, and it doesn't matter if it's diabetes or cancer survivor or this or that, or whatever. If you're in a peer group that are all moving in the same direction of wellness, then you do better. And the studies all prove this. And so it's not magic really, but it is the willingness to leave maybe your own family of origin and definitely your peer group for a time, or at least join another group, and get that support system and build in that support system. So when the going gets tough, and like those 90+% of people that gain all the weight back in the first year, and you're in the ninth month and you get a divorce, you don't go back to the sugar to handle the divorce. You actually go to the group and you talk it out or whatever. I know it sounds
Mhm.
simplistic, but again, a lot of peer reviewed studies and a lot of proof that it does work.
Yeah, I think simplistic is great because when it comes to weight loss or trying to feel in control of eating, we have been kind of taught that it should be hard and that it should be complex and it has to be this like, certain number of macros and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But really, a lot of it comes down to some really simple stuff that you do consistently,
Hmm.
which ultimately gets you the results.
Sure.
What do you think of the other place or area of controversy that sometimes comes up is the concept of complete abstinence versus sometimes eating it.
Hmm.
And so, from your experience, does it have to always be complete abstinence from sugar and flour?
Do I have to do this for the rest of my life? My main
Mhm.
number one question. And the answer is maybe. It depends. And so I got this little I call it buying into Mikey's little fantasy. Okay. And what it is, what a scratch test is, like an allergist scratch test? So
Mhm.
an allergist scratch test, well, for your audience, I'm sure most of them know that they're all doctors, but um, you scratch ragweed, pollen, dust, whatever, and you put a little Band-Aid over it, and then they look at it the next couple of days and see if it caused an irritation, right? And they find out if you're allergic to something. Well, our scratch test is give me 90 days. Just give me 90 days. There's no doctors, there's you know, no regulators. Nobody's going to say that quitting sugar for 90 days is going to, be some big health problem, whatever. So I just say, give me 90 days of abstinence, and you make the decision at that point. Never, ever, ever to this date do I know thousands of detoxes, thousands of 90 days. People got to 90 days. Have I ever had anyone turn back who actually truly gave me 100% abstinence? Abstinence, 100% abstinence is 100 times easier than attempts at moderation. We have attempted moderation for decades. The $72 billion diet industry has attempted moderation for decades, and we're still fatter and sicker, right? The whole society is fat, and each of us individually fatter and sicker. So just give me 90 days. Their skin clears up, they're falling to a right sized body, their processing power and memory starts to come back, the brain fog clears. And look, I'll full disclosure, full transparency, some people do fall back after 90 days or later on, but they always come back. They always come back to the group. They always come back to the process. They it's hard. I mean, when I was trying to quit drinking, or when I was trying to do this, and when everyone's trying to do it, you're gonna fight to the very end not to give up this dopamine hit. And when
Mm-hmm.
people really cleave apart the idea that they're not trying to get a sweet treat, they are not trying to get, their cravings are not to submit to a treat of, I don't got to stop using that word because it's a terrible reward, but a sugary substance. What happens is they finally admit that they can't do it. They give up the fight. Okay. And it takes every sweet treat it takes whatever it takes to get you there. But once you get there, you accept it. And people have done what we call research and development. They'll go back out and try it, but that doesn't work for the third of people that I describe, and for a lot of the second third of people that I describe, it just doesn't work. And the fight is useless in a lot of ways. It's just time, delaying time, right? So anyway, I mean, I get kind of passionate about it because I want to save people the time of the back and forth, right? I don't want to see them have to
Mm.
go back and forth. And the only way to do that is to give me 90 days of 100% abstinence. And you make the decision. On day 91, one thing that they're not doing is the N1 experiment with one thing. Okay, so maybe they want to try a coffee, or maybe they want to try spelt flour, or maybe they want to try something else, one thing, and see how you feel, see how it reacts in your body. But right now, we're pounding ourselves with 21 teaspoons of sugar a day, average. If you've got any habit at all, Coke is 12, 30, 40 teaspoons of sugar. That's before flour every single day. Your nucleus accumbens, your dopamine, serotonin, it doesn't have a prayer. It's never been at the factory settings, maybe in the womb. And you just have never known what calm feels like. So again, I get on a soapbox a little bit, but you understand what I'm saying. It's like, I want to
Mm-hmm.
save folks the time. They don't need to do it because thousands have already tried it. They've tried to moderate, they've tried to do a little here and a little there, and it just doesn't work. Not for everyone, but for the folks who have listened this far in this podcast, it's not going to work. I got this thing at sugaraddiction.com. I got this quiz. I say, if you listen to a podcast like this and you get to the you get to the site sugaraddiction.com, and you don't have to take the quiz, because I guarantee that you don't need to. You're already there, right? You knew it, like deep down you knew it, but then you let it go again because of the cultural. You don't want to be left
Mm-hmm.
out. You don't want to be alone.
And let's talk kind of from a practical standpoint, and kind of bringing in that concept of the culture for people who do decide, okay, I'm doing it, I'm going totally abstinent. How do they handle? Do you have practical ways of handling not eating sugar around other people who expect that you would? So things like celebrations, birthdays, going out for, it's not like we do this a lot right now with COVID, but going out for dinner with a friend who you would normally share a dessert with.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle saying no to the sugar from a practical standpoint without feeling kind kind of like you're standing out would be what people worry about.
It's a great question, and to be honest, one of the core pillars of what we do. It's so important to help to rejigger those things, to understand that there is change required there. I always share a story of a woman who had 90 days with us or something, and her friend's husband died, and after a grieving period, 3 weeks or 4 weeks, they went to lunch, and same exact thing happened. Time came for dessert, and the woman wanted her dessert and whatever, and the woman just did not have the wherewithal, the courage to begin this conversation when it was really about getting together after her husband of 40 years had passed, kind of thing. And so she broke down, and she had the sugar. She regained her resolve, and she went on to make it a lifestyle. But that is an example of what happens all the time. And for the most part, most of the people we deal with, they're the only one in the family. And a lot of our folks are women, and they're not only the grocery shopper, but the cook for the husband and the children. And they have a difficult time because they don't want to stand out. And they have what I call a credibility issue, because they've been on 20 diets, and okay, mom's doing it again, and nobody pays any attention to them. And so I like to tell them, go stealth for a little while. Just don't tell anybody. And what happens is folks here's the thing that I want to impress upon people is that, like the people that have already recovered, what you're going to find out, and I'm here to tell you, a little glass of water here. I'm here to tell you that no one cares. No one is paying attention to what you're eating. Now, you won't feel that at the beginning. You're going to feel like you say you're the odd man out, you're abnormal, but no one cares. And as a matter of fact, it flip-flops at about 6 months after and 40 or 50 pounds. It flip-flops, and then your family starts to support you. They start to brag about you because they've seen the results, right? But in the beginning, you're 100% right that it's difficult socially, culturally, familially, a lot of reasons when you change what you've always done, right? You were always a sugar person, you were a baker, or you were whatever. So yeah, it's very intuitive of you because it's very real, but there is an answer to it, and it's just it takes a little bit of time, a little bit of orientation, to get your feet under you.
Mm-hmm. And I think I always talk to the people and patients that I work with of just coming up with some statement that works for you, that kind of because not everybody wants to get into details and discussion about it at every situation. And this is true for sugar addiction, or if you're just trying to eat differently, like follow a lower carb diet for your health. You don't always want to get into the conversation every time, because sometimes then people have their own opinions that they
Right.
really want to share with you, but
Yeah.
don't necessarily match your
Always.
opinions.
Always.
And so coming up with some statements that you can just be like, I'm just not eating that right now, or I just don't feel like that right now. Something simple that then doesn't add more conversation if you don't want it, but works and lets you kind of get out of it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, that we don't have and that's why I like this podcast forum, because it takes about that long of an art for me to explain the things that I've explained. And we don't have a meat is murder, and we don't have friends don't let friends drive drunk. We don't have an instant thing that someone can say to their friend, kind of thing, where they take a stand, because of all the things you mentioned. It's kind of like, it's complex if someone starts the discussion. So we tell them, one of the things that's worked for me over the years, is I can't have sugar. Now, if that's for people you don't know, usually servers in a restaurant, and they will literally go to bat for you. They think you have diabetes. You don't have to tell them you don't. They just say, I can't eat sugar. And they go running back to the chef, and they get everything straight for you. And for family, It's like uh, you've got to, like I say, you just say, just stealth, just don't do anything at the beginning. Get yourself into the group, get yourself into the process a little bit. Um, but you're right, it's difficult because of other people's perception. They will they will fight you. I mean, they will fight you. They don't want to give up their stuff. They don't want to see it. They
Mhm.
don't want to look at it. And if you're doing it, then maybe they're doing it wrong, kind of thing. So it is
Yeah, it's that reflection.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, we've covered a lot of stuff, but are there any other tips or thoughts you would like to leave people with?
Yeah, the one thing that I always tell folks is that, and I don't know why this happened. It's just pattern recognition. It just keeps happening, um, where we've been able to pinpoint things through the detox and through the process of success for thousands of folks. Is that most of the people are what tech people call early adopters, meaning they're not afraid to do their own research and then do something that goes a little against the grain of what's a norm in society. They when you search back to their history and whatever, they have been the first person to go to college. They may be great in athletics. Heck, they might be the best mechanic in town or whatever. They might be. They have left their family of origin and joined another tribe or group or their cohort group in high school, and they've moved on. And they've had success in other realms of their life that they can translate to this and do their research and then just put their toe in the water and see if this group of people is nuts, crazy, and extreme, or they are really onto something. And that seems to be the description of the folks that seem to get success. The folks that, like, we never went into this, but the issues that mirror the addictive process of codependency, the people with deeper, longer, stronger codependent ties to their family and their friends and kind of stuff, they have a harder time because now they've got to look at their codependency right in the face because of the stuff that we talked about, the social interaction of folks. And so it's very difficult, not difficult, but yeah, it is difficult to um, break loose of that if you haven't done it before in some way as an early adopter. But as it becomes more mainstream, then it'll be easier for more folks. So we got to play with who shows up, and right now the early adopters are showing up.
Yeah. And I think, like, you're right, as it becomes more mainstream and it's talked more about, it becomes easier to, well, it removes the stigma, which I think is a huge piece of it. But it also becomes easier to start. The first time you hear about it, you might be those, that sounds wackadoodle, like never eat sugar, like what the heck. And
Right.
then, a couple more times you hear about it, then you might start thinking, yeah, maybe that is a little bit me. And then over time, if it's what you need, it'll hopefully start to resonate and let you take those steps of uh, trying the time without it and seeing how it goes. Now,
It's
where can people find you? Oh, sorry.
well, it's exactly what you said. It's just an experiment. Just give it a try.
Yeah. I love that concept for everything with eating and weight and everything, of viewing it as an experiment. Try it, see what happens, tweak it if it's
Hmm.
not working.
Yeah.
Where can people find you?
Sugaraddiction.com. Um, we recently, it's not really up yet, but we recently purchased sugardetox.com because that's where people come in. So probably maybe somebody's listening to this next year or something, that'll be up. But yeah, I mean, the Quit Sugar Summit is twice a year. If you leave your email there, you can get all the science that I've been talking about, not from me, but from Robert Lustig and Michael Gorin, the founder of the Gorin Lab here at USC, and people that have been studying Michael Gorin's been studying childhood obesity for 30 years and has raised $50 million about it. But no one knows about Michael Gorin. You know what I mean? They know about they know about
Hmm.
weight loss gurus and that kind of stuff, but they don't know about someone who's actually been in the trenches and studied this stuff. And so the Quit Sugar Summit will get you that information. the science, the absolute,
Yeah. And like I said at the
the
beginning,
deep science. Yeah.
yeah. And I was just going to say, it's a great summit. Like there's fantastic speakers in it.
Yeah. So yeah, sugaraddiction.com is where our home is mostly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed the chat.
Well, thank you. And you're doing great work. I mean, one of the touch points of physicians that you're, servicing in your work, is like anything. If we can get them on board to understand this and in a deep way, personally maybe, then they can spread it to their clients and stuff.
Absolutely.